Luke, welcome to Austin Next.
Yeah, thanks. Super pumped to be here. Excited to chat about all the things today.
All the things. I'm sure we'll go in a lot of different directions, as we always tend to. So I think we're going to start off kind of with the big thing and kind of where we want to go is, so last June, South by made I think announcement is kind of almost an overstatement. It was kind of almost tucked in, and then a lot of people kind of found it, where they decided that the Army and defense companies were no longer going to be their sponsors. And this raised a lot of issues and blowback, including from myself. First talk me through, like, what was your initial reaction? And then what did you see kind of from both people locally, outside of Austin, kind of all around?
Yeah. My reaction was shock at first. It was the environment, the way they announced it, just this kind of like knee-jerk reaction, which I think is a strategic mistake that they're going to realize, where you have, the U.S. military, defense contractors, and I think in one of their announcements they said like weapons manufacturers. So that we're all kicked out of this event in 2025 from sponsoring. And, when I look at Austin and, my personal background, I spent 20 years in the U.S. Army, 16 years on active duty, 4 years as a reservist, most of that time on the special operations side. And, realizing,
service.
Yeah, thank you. All my buddies in Austin, there's a big group of special operations veterans, combat veterans, dual use companies, defense tech focused companies, and going like, this is huge. Like, a lot of people come to this event to hear from these companies, and there's, big defense track. And now that's gone away. And my immediate reaction is, like I was talking to you and some other folks, like, hey, we should do something about this. Cause there's, just for a lot of reasons to talk about. And even, if there's controversial decisions, like the good thing is to talk about it, not just close your eyes and ears and pretend it doesn't exist for it. So,
and I haven't had the opportunity, just because of how many panels and such that they have. So you had that initial of like, they don't want them as sponsors, but then they've started releasing the panels. And what I haven't had an opportunity to do is go through them all and to say, okay, is it really you just don't want sponsors, or what is the level of, it's not even at South by anymore?
Yeah, there's like nothing there. It's like this muted response where there's like, it's a shift in focus away from this. And I think, a time of the environment or sign of the times where you have probably, in what I know, and just from what I read in the press, like a vocal minority that has their feelings hurt over it. And then the knee-jerk reaction going like, yeah, let's cancel all of this from sponsoring. And, the track is there. I mean, I know, a bunch of companies, current military organizations that are just not coming. And, part of the vibe too was like, no one feels welcome. Again, even if they have panels, you're losing that draw, and you're stepping into an environment where the organizers of the environment said, we don't want you here. And oh, by the way, the military is a tremendous organization that, is the foundation of our nation, for, GDP and, the good work we do. And then they sponsor too. They sponsor with a lot of money because they want to get the voice on. They want to have the conversation. So yeah, I'm not sure what the panels look like. Candidly, I'm not that interested in it. I don't plan on, partaking in any South by Southwest events because my draw to South by was to hear about, the defense space panels and, dual use companies and, all the different types of innovation organizations in the military that use this opportunity to gather a bunch of differing opinions from across the nation, because everyone's there. And now that's gone. So there's this void, and, like what we'll get to, decided to fill that with our event.
You see the ever growing connection between South by and defense, right? Like my understanding was, I think it was like 2016, 2017, it was Lockheed started getting involved, and then you kind of had this kind of crescendo growing. And, during when Ukraine started, it was all there, and it was really a major piece of it. I think that was kind of the big crescendo. And then, last year, all of a sudden it was all this kind of controversy that was going on. And you can almost see in many ways how short-sighted it was, because I feel very much like there was a vibe shift today. Literally, as we're recording this, there was a ceasefire deal signed between Hamas and Israel. So
Yeah.
that's gotten so like that, and that seemed to have been the big push of why, the claiming of why. And I have some issues of it was always okay when the Ukraine stuff was going on pro this, but when it was Israel, it was somehow an issue. So that's an issue for me. But so by March, what's going to be, it's a very different kind of environment that's going on there. While at the same time, when we talk about like, your my reaction in Austin, when I just saw kind of around what was going on and the reactions to that, there was it felt like, now we can say that X and Twitter might be a bubble. So like, I'm willing to accept that, but a pretty strong reaction from your sense. Was the reaction more a reflection of like hitting Austin? Was it hitting South by, or at this point, is it almost forgotten?
Yeah, I think the react like that initial reaction, because I remember I like tweeted about it. Like when I saw the announcement, I was like, we should do something on it. And I don't have like a crazy viral Twitter following, but that post like picked up because speaking as a former military member, friends with a bunch. I've got a dual use startup, in this defense industry, and like you could see instantly like there's like, hey, what is going on? I think the biggest hit was on the reputation of South by. And I think it's probably going to take years to recover that because, what investor, I mean, people spend a lot of money to come to Austin for this event. And, it's not like there's a lack of defense focused conferences in the US. There's plenty more. So
Right.
I think strategically South by lost out on big revenue share, or not revenue share, revenue, generator from, a bunch of companies for sponsorships from the military. And how do they overcome it? I don't know if they will. Like a bunch of people that are in pretty senior positions, recently retired general officers that I know are like not interested in attending anymore because it's a reputation thing. And what's interesting too is the counter. Like there's all kinds of, military focused, defense focused conferences all over the place. And what I like about it is everyone's welcome. Like there's artists there and they like, it's not just about missiles and guns. It's about all, acquisitions and, retention, and talks about like, innovation a lot. And like we welcome, the military welcomes diverse opinions because they know that's how you get better. That's why there's, the AFWorks, the Innovation Center in Austin. That's why Army Research Laboratory is in Austin. That's why Army Futures Command is in Austin, because they know this is a good spot to be for defense and the initiative. So it's almost, just like this unfair perspective of like, well, the military is welcoming to everyone. Like you look across the ranks too, like it's a very diverse thing. But yet now we're not welcome in a spot because a handful of artists didn't like a policy that, oh, by the way, most military members, don't have a vote in. They're volunteering to serve and defend the country, and they don't, get into the politics. So I think it was, again, short-sighted, but I'm excited for what's going to come because I think voids are meant to be filled, and there's a huge void, that South by is now vacating, and I'm happy to fill it at whatever level we can.
Yeah, and I think before we get to Austin4America, I think that might be just a good moment to talk about that. There is this sense for a moment of when we talk about like defense and for the some of the lay people and so forth, it is that first of okay, we're talking about like weapons, right? And I think your company is almost like this perfect example of like, will not, yes, sometimes, because clearly, offensive materials needed, but not always. And when we have all these companies, like you just mentioned, like AL and Army Future Command coming to Austin, it's not solely because, hey, we need missiles, we need whatever. So can you talk a minute for about like what your company is and how it might represent like, okay, this is the kinds of things that might be being built in Austin.
Yeah. Yeah. And before getting on SkyFi too, again, a lot of the biases in the military coming from folks that don't understand it. They don't want to have the conversation of what the military does. The first thing the military does is to prevent wars. It's a deterrence factor. And then, yes, if needed, to overwhelmingly win wars if we're provoked enough to get into it. And yes, the last bunch of decades we've been steeped in, controversial, combat and wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere around the world. But again, that first thing is to deter. And I think that's where, the innovation comes in, these dual use startups, defense tech startups that can really help that, having the best technology in the world. And most time, the best technology in the world isn't created by the military. It's by innovative startups that are thinking differently and thinking about the problem set differently and handing the tools that they build to the military.
That's been the big flip over the last 100 years. Like, it used to be the government outside Manhattan Project being kind of the epitome. And then now it's kind of, that's been flipped to now all of the innovations coming from the outside. And now we need to get a better way to get it back inside.
Yeah. And that's what's really interesting too about Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley started by defense needs, building the microchips for missiles and guidance systems. And then the decades, so the R&D spend by the defense industry used to outweigh the commercial industry. Then over the last bunch of decades, it's flip-flopped where, now we need the civilian innovation and commercial innovation to drive technology forward. So it's really interesting. Like, we'll see where that goes. I mean, I think commercial innovation will continue to lead. But there's lessons, we can learn about, like, the history, and that's what a lot of people forget. And I spent time in Silicon Valley too. And I mean, you go there now and you wouldn't, if you ask most people on the street, like, how'd this all start? They would think like, Facebook and Google, but not like defense weapons is how that started.
Silicon Valley's been around a little bit longer than Facebook and Google.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So my company is a pretty prime example of, like, we're not building weapons. It's not offensive capabilities. My company SkyFi is an Earth intelligence platform company. And what that means is we have a partnership of satellite companies, aerial imaging companies, airplane companies, and analytic companies all over the world. And we built a web and mobile application that allows users, heavily geared towards enterprise users, government users, but people of the world, to access the technology to get business questions answered, intelligence community questions answered, government questions answered by tasking satellites in the future, getting historical imagery going back years and sometimes decade, and then applying those analytics to drive those answers. And some examples of what we can do. So you can determine the oil inventory across most of the world by using satellite technology. You can get moisture content of soil. You can detect fishing vessels, building detection. So these really like defense oriented, like they're commercial driving, questions that solve all this. And on the defense side, the commercial world for satellite imagery is starting to outpace at various levels what the defense industry can create. And Austin is a prime example. There's some phenomenal satellite companies here. Umbra is one, where they have what's called synthetic aperture radar. So radar imaging satellites that see through clouds. It looks like a black and white image, but really high fidelity. So it's this all weather, can see through the rain and clouds, and it doesn't matter all over the world because most of the world is cloudy about 70% of the time. Then other younger companies like Albedo, which launch a satellite in a couple months, which will have the world's first 10 centimeter commercial resolution imagery. So that means now you're starting to compete with drones for the fidelity that you can see from space, but think of it as a massive scale. So as they get more satellites in space, you're going to just have this super, super high resolution imagery. And with that, you layer analytics on companies like that and their products. Now you're able to get this intelligent view of the Earth and start interrogating the Earth with questions, because you're just going to have this rich data that comes through. And so we also work with the government. The government has the same problem the commercial world does, in that there's more, thanks to our friend Elon Musk and SpaceX, there's more satellites being launched, there's more analytic companies being launched than ever. So it's this data overload problem. And what my company does is we just aggregate it all in this one-stop shop. So you don't have to talk to all these different companies. You just have it all in one spot. And so that's what the government needs, because, the government uses it for, this geospatial technology for a variety of instances, and they have this data problem. So we're just aggregating it all. And we've got a bunch of other exciting, stuff. We're building some platforms for some of the largest satellite companies in the world. And what I mean by platforms is their digital storefronts. And I think by the time this episode comes out, we'll have some, huge press release for it. Some of the leading satellite companies in the world. And so we're in this good spot. And again, this is, we're under this, what we believe is a true dual use company where we're serving a commercial customer and a defense company, a defense customer with the same product. We don't have this wildly different commercial product and a wildly different government product. So it's all in one.
But then it just feels a lot like with the way a lot of times I describe Austin, right? These kind of convergence companies where it's both the physical and the digital. Here you've got, physical to satellites, definitely space, and then being able to layer that digital component on top of it as well. And what I also like as much is one of the things that I've started to notice a lot about Austin companies is just being very, very mission driven, right? And being able to answer these kinds of questions. Not that, again, there's nothing wrong with the next app. There's nothing wrong with the next kind of a B2B enterprise SaaS company kind of thing. But there's just a sense of what an Austin company is. And then with these kind of defense tech type and critical tech, it really does kind of fit into that. And I think I think that's one of the reasons I felt like that it didn't feel like Austin, right? It didn't feel when you had that announcement, it just didn't, it was, look, I've had Hugh on and I've had these questions when it had out, it was always supposed to be that South by reflected Austin. That was always this kind of thing. And this was one of the times, I've only been here 4 years, so I can only say it, but one of the times where it did seem a bit of a divergence of these kinds of things. And so now getting into that, a lot of people, yourself included, and we've talked offline, that's just why I wanted to talk to you, on the pod about this, is kind of raised their hand and said, okay, fine. If South by is not doing this, and there still is this kind of want, and there's a bit of a reaction to it, we'll do it ourselves kind of situation. So Austin4America is a bit of the reaction to it. So talk to me about how did you go from the announcement to this?
Yeah. It's really, it escalated quickly, as
things tend to.
Yeah, tend to. It I wouldn't say it went viral on Twitter, but just enough in my local network where people picked up on it. Our mutual acquaintance there, Larry Covert, and I, have known each other for a while, and he's a big freedom-loving American, like most of us in Austin. And so I texted him. I was like, "Hey, should we do something about this? Like, should we, get some good people together, brainstorm, have a conference?" Because, like you're saying, it just doesn't feel like Austin. It feels like there has to be something here. Because then all the satellite companies I just mentioned, and a whole bunch of there's underwater drone companies like TerraDepth that are dual use companies. There's, on and on and on we could go, all about the Austin based companies. Like, we need a place for this. Like, we need a place that, one, you're welcome. Like, people are welcome to come talk about, all the issues, about dual use tech, investing in America, the topics that are starting to come up, like psychedelic research for veteran PTSD and suicide, branding in the defense world, like how do you market yourself and your company in this world. And so it just started with a couple text messages, and then some folks in my company were very excited about it as well. I've got a handful of veterans, like most companies I know in Austin, that work just like myself, that are like, hey, let's throw a really kick-ass event. And so 6 to 7 March in Austin at Fair Market, which is just on the east side of downtown, we're throwing a 2-day event. Really, it's about a day and a half. So day one, and we'll get into the agenda a little bit. Full day, we've got a bunch of just like super interesting speakers coming, panels. Day two gets in, so day one's a little more focused on like investing and highlighting a lot of the companies. Day two, a little bit of shift. It gets into the branding, but the health and wellness, talking about food supply. Again, the psychedelic research that should be talked about more and more, as a counter, and which I'm, really excited about what RFK Jr. comes in and does, is like, let's get big pharma out of the picture so much and look at the actual research and evidence before we do something. And really with the flavor of like veteran, help, suicide prevention, PTSD, anxiety, depression, like what most combat veterans, go through. Let's talk about that and give a space, for the resources instead of having these like back channel discussions about it. So, and it's going to be different. Like, our vibe, and like, I'd like to see our company knows how to do things like, we've thrown an event before, a couple events in Austin. They're pretty fun and different. What I don't want, we're not going to have is, the same conversations about dual use and defense where, a bunch of dudes that look like me and you in blue suits, and they just repeat the same line over and over about like, innovation and we have to move faster. It's like, no, cool. Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you move faster? How do you get the funding? How do you bring a company from pre-seed to, valued over $1 billion? Like, some of the companies here in Austin are, and promote more of that. So super excited. Yeah. So 6 to 7 March, Fair Market, Austin, and it's free to attend. That's the big thing. Like, we're not charging people to attend, it's all sponsorship driven. And I thought, asking for money was going to be hard for an event like this. Completely the opposite. We have, people coming out of the woodworks, just, patriots that are like, let me donate. I want to help. I want to give this a spot, and again, because what I also don't want to do is go, hey, startups, you can come and present yourself for, a couple $1,000. Like,
Right.
Startups are hard. You want to, capital is efficient, and it should be the opposite. Like, we want to give you a space to talk about it. So my company's obviously going to be there, and we're, organizing it and sponsoring it at various levels. But excited about the Austin community to really show up and see stuff. We'll have stuff like, trying to get some cold plunges and saunas and all that stuff too, and do some ruck marches in the morning, and make it fun.
So, given that in one way, I think by putting it the 6 and 7, you're trying to make a stand, plant a flag, and counter program to South by. At the same time, let's be honest, by putting it right there, and there's always South by stuff and the extension of it. How does it just not feel like you're a auxiliary event to South by?
Yeah, we definitely are taking advantage. Like, people will still come into town for this. There will still be, because there's meetings set up and investors and like defense folks that come into town anyways. So we want to have it at a time where there's a lot of travel. And, oh, by the way, like that time of year, like, in Austin's pretty awesome. So, a lot of people from the north will flood here anyways, if you give them like a little bit of a reason to do it.
That's you always joke. They come in March, like, Austin's wonderful. And they're like, yes. Then they come in August. They're like, wait, I moved here. What happened?
Yes. Yeah, you tricked me.
Yeah. I never understood someone who grew up in Southern California. I never understood the concept of summering until I lived here during July and August. But that's why everyone goes to Colorado and Wyoming during the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I grew up in northern Wisconsin, so yeah, I definitely feel like, where, my family's like locked in the winter, for 4 months up there, where I'm just, I think I washed my car the other day outside or something. So it's funny. But yeah, like, timing's everything. So yes, we needed to plan ahead of time enough to get it organized. There's people coming in, but also very candidly, kind of to go like, hey, South by, we're still doing this. Like, you can kick out the military, you can kick out defense contractors and, air quotes, weapons manufacturers, but we're still going to do it anyways because there's a need to do it and people want to do it. So we don't need that organization to do anything because it's just about the people. That's just right. South by is just a name as far as I'm concerned. So
we also there seems to be now. I'll say by proxy, I'm tuned into the defense arena. It feels like there are a lot of defense tech summits, like any other, conferences, like anything else. How does this? It's not, defense tech summit. Why? It's Austin4America. So how does it rhyme with Austin outside of having a bunch of Austin companies there?
Yeah. I mean, I think the flavor and vibe of Austin, yes, like I'm saying, and there's a bunch of defense tech companies, conferences all over the place. Like, every week you can go do something, and it's kind of like rinse and repeat, pretty boring, pretty stodgy, where you get, a bunch of agencies there that, don't really know what the problem set is and how they can relate it to startups in a language that startups understand, and then vice versa. So yes, it's this trend that we see also where Austin, if you look over the last, I don't know, since we've been here 4-ish years, I've arrived here about the same time, where it's a gravity, like, it's this center where defense tech feels comfortable. All the major companies are moving here, SpaceX, Tesla, obviously, like these big foundational companies are
Yeah.
moving here and being created here. And so that's why we think this, like, Austin is this like perfect recipe for what America represents, in a lot of reasons. And it's
The
not,
moment that I knew that like the narrative was here in defense tech was uh I don't I think I know who it was, but I don't want to necessarily get it wrong and call them out on this. But it was somebody on X was making a case for why Florida, should be good in for defense tech. And the tweet was literally like, just so you know, you don't have to move to the Gundo or Austin to be in defense tech. I'm like, okay, if that's your positioning of here are the two places everybody knows, and come over here, you've done something right. That like you're the two places you're one of the two places everybody's comparing against.
yeah, exactly. And I spent some time in California and got out of there pretty quick after my active duty time. And yes, you can build anywhere, like you really, really can, but you also have to have like, a good situation where you can afford to have employees there. I always make the joke, if you want most of your VC money to go to rent, yeah, build in California. It'll be great. Rent and taxes, like that's where your money's going. And it just, for a lot of reasons, doesn't make sense to me based on the company, especially hardware companies.
Well, and even look, I had even this case, and like I like I had I had some I did a whole episode on the Gundo, and I like what they're doing there, and I like the people from there. But even on that episode, they made a great point about while they build there, they can't scale there. Like when any of them have to build their version of the Gigafactory, it won't be in California. It'll be in Texas and Arizona and Georgia or whatever. I mean, the whole point about, and I'm waiting every day to hear where Arsenal 1 from Andrew is built, and I think that Austin has a good chance of winning that.
Yeah.
Given the fact that the was it Arming the Arsenal, I think was the name of their big paper, references the Gigafactory like 8 times. That I think that we have a good, and of course, if that does come to Austin, that the narrative ends like that this is the place.
Right.
The number of like Palantir, SpaceX, Andrew people like running around in Austin continually, like it just makes sense.
It's like it's become a hotbed of like, employee talent, good living conditions, low tax rates. They welcome it. Like, Governor Abbott and, the whole, Texas political environment really welcomes building here because they know it's friendly. And that's what you have, where it's the opposite. Again, California is great for a lot of things, but I think, like I said, building and scaling gets very difficult. I know I used to be in the electric aviation world a little bit, and two California companies, Joby and Archer, that are building these electric aircraft, headquartered in California. And to prove your point, they're building in major manufacturing facilities in Ohio and Georgia because you can't afford to do it in California at the scale that you need to make money, and that's really important.
Well, I mean, your point with Archer, like I just blanked on his name. The guy behind it, and then he's now doing Figure, right?
I can't remember his name.
Yes.
Adam Goldstein's the CEO of Archer, but
but it's interesting, right? Because the exact
Brett Adcock.
Right. Thank you. But it's interesting because when you look at now, like robotics, the same thing. Like you've got Optimus here, you've got Aptronic here, and then Figures being obviously one of the other big ones. And it is interesting that because of you need the ability to build here, but it is this convergence of bits, atoms, and intelligence is becoming, I think, what Austin is, because you can do it makes sense. Look, if you're doing a pure foundational model of AI, get your ass to San Francisco. That makes perfect sense. Like that is where that epicenter is, and it matches those first principles. But if you're going to embodiment of that hardware, then that makes much more sense here, because we're starting to have more and more of that talent, and we have the physical ability to build that. That's why the Gigafactory is here. That is why Icon is here. That's why the robotics and SpaceX and Starlink is over in Bastrop, and Starbase is down in Starship and all of those are being down in Brownsville, and now Starbase, right? So like you have those first principles that make sense, and that's why it makes a lot of sense that defense tech is being what it is here.
Yeah, Man, it's a good spot. And again, you have some phenomenal military organizations that are here too, and that, other units that come here because they know it's special. Like I spent most of my morning today talking to a bunch of 3-letter agencies, like doing the tour of Austin because they know it's this, hotbed of activity where they can hit up all these companies that are doing really innovative stuff. And then, like I said, Army Futures Command, Army Applications Laboratory, AFWorks, like on and on and on. I'm probably forgetting some.
Yeah.
DIU has a small presence here. Like, it's here. And that's a good representation of DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, that was started by the late Secretary of Defense Ash Carter a handful of years ago, where put people in Silicon Valley, Boston, and Austin, where this triangle where you have innovation, and Austin was very, intentionally picked. And that's why these organizations are here, because they know it. So yeah, back again on the theme of, why Austin for America. I came up with the name. I was like joking around with some of my folks. I'm like, we're going to do this. So one of my friends, she's like, I'm never moving here. Like, I like my spot in DC. And I'm like, well, we're building this Austin for America event because I like it. And it's got a good ring to it. And it's true. We're building for America. That's what all the companies here are doing. And it's a great, like, again, especially with the new political environment coming in, it seems like the right time to do it too, for this whole innovation thing that we need to do more of.
Right, and it gets back to the whole the rhyming. I said that if an Austin company is mission driven, so that Austin for America kind of rhymes that mission driven. So, can you talk a bit about who you've got signed up, who's speaking, what kind of things are actually on the book so far?
Yeah, and I'm super excited. Again, we're building the plane as we fly it a little bit, but so day
Always
one,
safe.
yeah. Again, coming from a pilot too, like it can happen. We can do that. Day one, we're going to kick off with recently retired 3-star Lieutenant General Dan Kane, who was the head military liaison at the CIA. Just recently retired. He's going to kick off, like he retired just last month. His candid take on where we are as a nation, where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are, what we need to do. And that's like about as recent as you can get it for our environment. And, Dan's become a friend, and what's really interesting about Dan too is, yes, he spent a lot of time in the military, but he had some gaps there where he did startups. So he understands and speaks startup, which is so rare to have somebody come in and like know what, a pre-seed, seed, series A founder is going through when they're trying to build a product and balance customer demands and priorities and all that stuff. So he really will understand, I think, resonate to the audience. And then it'll be immediately followed by, we're going to do a fireside chat. And this is, brand new, another friend, Steve Bauscher, who runs InQtel. So the head honcho at InQtel, he's going to come in with another good investor, Kirsten Bartuk, who's running New Vista Capital. They're going to have a talk, same thing about this like value of VC, or private capital and government capital, into ensuring American supremacy. Like, how do we do this? How do we invest in the right companies at the right speed for the value that America needs to see the return on it? So, I'm really excited about that one. Then we're going to have, some panels, again, a dual use panel of investors discussing their motivation, where they see opportunity, given the new political, environment we're about to enter in about 5 days from when this episode's being recorded. And those are going to cover, a variety of investors, some from Austin, some from outside, but all heavily invested at various levels into Austin-based companies. So that'll be day one. And then really excited about this one where we're getting it together, like some frontline views of some drone operators from Ukraine. What are they experiencing? Like, what is it actually like in this warfare that, again, we're always, as a nation, we've never been able to predict the next war accurately. Having hundreds.
I don't think that's a U.S. problem. I think that's a war problem in general.
War problem in general. Like, in the Ukraine-Russia war is a prime example. Like, the amount of what's going on with drone warfare there is terrifying. Like, just thinking about that battlefield, like how, like, maneuver elements with drones literally buzzing overhead, like how terrifying that is. Like, so some views from there. Then we're going to hear from a handful of Austin-based startups in the afternoon about how startups are enabling innovation on the front line, talking about the drone stuff. So, good buddy, former Navy SEAL Joe Woofle, who runs Terror Depth. Ian Villa, he's a former Uber colleague of mine. He's running a company called Whisper Aero. They're actually out of the Tennessee area, but again, investing a lot in building and a lot of defense tech dual use for ultra quiet electric propulsion systems and aircraft and drones. Stronic will likely make an appearance on that one too. Either Rob or Dino. We're good buddies there. A company called Firestorm, where they're doing on-edge additive manufacturing. And then a little bit more so it's going to be interesting too. And we're going to have some good moderators too. We're not just going to have tell me what your company does and what you're excited about, like the spicy questions getting in there.
Right.
Why is your company not going to work? What's your competitive, really trying to get it out where it's interesting. And then also shifting this paradigm shift for one of the panels in the afternoon is we're having startups now that we see that are building technology that was once only and still to some point only done by defense primes. So hypersonic aircraft by Hermeus. Skylar, one of the founders there, is going to talk. Aeon by our buddy Naweed, building missiles. Will Edwards of Firehawk, jet fuel, rocket fuel.
Firehawk just got a big round, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, big round led by or participating by 1789, which is Donald Trump Jr. is involved in that one as well. So we're going to have some more rapid chats. Of course, I'm running a geospatial company, so we're going to have a focus on space with the various companies, Umbra, SkyFi, Albedo, some analytics companies in town as well. And then at the other end, what is really important, which is often thought of the boring stuff, but what I think is the most exciting and most defense tech companies going after government contracts is this cash, customers, combat. How do you figure this all out from an acquisition side, winning in the defense market?
Right.
Winning the defense market, yes, it's about having the best product, but also understanding the acquisition side, understanding that.
Because it's simple and straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's super easy. If you've seen the diagram of the actual military acquisition flow,
I have. It hurts to look at.
It's crazy and it's real.
I can show you some EMR documentation and stuff too, and then you'll make your head hurt.
Yeah. Having some retired and current folks working in acquisition, like the Special Operations Command former acquisition executive Jim Smith, coming to talk the expert of experts. That's what he did for Special Operations Command, is how do you get equipment and technology into the Special Operations Force. Andrew Bossert, who runs a space advisory group where, again, he works with space-based startups. He's an acquisition professional in the Space Force as a reservist, speaking firsthand of what he sees from both, when he's in uniform and on the commercial side, and moderated by, lady that spent time in the Secret Service, has her own company she's a part of now. And then a whole bunch of other stuff. We may have some reporters coming in and kind of giving their takes, maybe some political folks as well. So that's just day one. Then, of course, throughout it, we're going to have, we've got displays, we've got, coffee, and we've got, refreshments and the food trucks and all that stuff coming. So that'll be great. Day two, little bit different flavor. Now we're shifting into this health and wellness, food supply, because that's national security concerns. Recruitment efforts in the military are just devastated because a lot of people aren't able to make the height and weight, or they're not motivated to join. And why is that? And if you look at our food supply, again, with RFK Jr. and the Make America Healthy Again, I'm a huge fan of that, and I've got kids too. So you see this, how easy it is to fill our bodies up with bullshit and be unhealthy and sick. And, unfortunately, there's not enough education about it because it's so easy and cheap to get the bad food. And it's easy to get the good food, but there's just a lack of awareness because, again, you're now against lobbying groups and big sugar and big pharma. And then also, so we're going to have some talks on that, the health and wellness. We're going to talk about PTSD. We've got some authors coming in, the theme of warrior withdrawal. What happens after veterans, specifically veterans that have spent, the last couple of decades serving in combat, special operations folks, which were pumped with adrenaline while they're on active duty for years and years and years. And then that shuts off when they leave service. And like, how do you deal with it? And it's a real issue of like, where does that adrenaline come from? Like where those dopamine hit comes from. And this, this path can lead multiple ways. For some, it's a tragic path where they can't cope with it and it's suicide. And then the other side is like,
they go do Spartan races.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, then we're going to shift a little bit too more on psychedelics and, talk about plant medicine and pushing these limits with, cures that are out there. And there's research studies, UT Austin, Dr. Greg Fonzo, who runs the psychedelic research there, specifically with special operations veterans, talk about this. And because I think about everything, I'm probably most excited for that one because I've had a bunch of friends where I've seen the personal experience of, every word I've heard from them is
there's some interesting stuff on the psychedelic side in that there is one of the issues in so like obviously my background is biohealth is that the testing and regulatory paths are not set up for some of the changes that whether it be psychedelics, whether it be AI, whether like it just, they were set up for things that didn't exist 60 years ago. And so like there was and I'm blanking on the name of the company, but there was a recent psychedelics trial that hit the FDA and it failed. But the reason it failed was due to trial design. But one of the issues is, you're right. You cannot have a normal, the way we think about it, control group when you're dealing with a psychedelic, because if you take the psychedelic, you're on a trip. There's no way to give, like, if you take the sugar pill, you're like, nothing happened. Like you don't have a normal blinded study like you would in another thing. So like, it's not in the situation that we have in others where it's a lot easier to do the normal blinded study.
Exactly.
So okay, that's the problem we now face. Let's think about what do we do in that? What do we do with that?
Yeah.
Because if we don't deal with that problem, then you just say, okay, then this entire class of drugs we can't deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just crazy. Like, and we're kidding ourselves if we don't think like big pharma is scared of this, where, some of these psychedelic treatments are like a one and done or one and almost done, where you don't need to give a bunch of opioids and pills for, like we're talking about veterans now, for the rest of their life.
Well, I'll put, and this is something I've talked a lot about on the pod and some of these different things. It's a classic like innovators dilemmas type of situation, because you have the problem. It's structural incentives. So because we have like Vertex right now has, essentially a one and done, CRISPR drug for sickle cell, and it's actually not making money.
Interesting.
So because they're not getting access to, like, we don't know, we haven't figured out the business model for the one and done. Like there was actually, I mentioned this on the pod before, like there was, Intellia had like great data came out for a one and done, it was another CRISPR drug, and the stock tanked because they're like, I don't know how to do. So this is so some of these things, you actually need to have the business model innovation to come along with it. There's a lot of things and I go off for hours on these kind of things, especially in like bio and health, where we think we have scientific challenges and we actually have business model challenges.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you want to go conspiratorial, like, oh, it's this or that. It's like, no, it's actually a business issue. Like why don't we have good antibiotics anymore? The reason we don't have good antibiotics anymore is if I create the next great antibiotic and the business model is I get paid if you use the antibiotic, and if I make the next great one, you're going to put it at the 10th line of defense, which means you will never use it, which means I will make no money off it. Why on earth would I create another great antibiotic? So then I won't make any. So the business model actually drives behavior.
It does. And that's what I also think is, again, more about like the bio world than I do, about the business models, what a lot of folks are solving for, not the treatment aspect of it. Which
why do we have corn syrup and why do we have corn syrup and everything? Because we have subsidies and incentives to produce more corn. Okay,
Yeah.
not a giant conspiracy. It's economic incentives.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It, it's crazy, and bring it back to Austin a little bit too, just by chance as we're talking about this. Over the last 2 weeks, Joe Rogan's podcast was talking about, psychedelics with former Governor Rick Perry about it, where he's standing up the Texas Initiative because he saw firsthand special operations veterans go through programs that, we had these individuals that were like had debilitating, depression, PTSD. They had to go to Mexico to get treatment, came back, and they're like, I'm cured. Like, why do we not have this in the US? Why are we sending our special operations veterans to Mexico to get treated? And we're the, most powerful nation in the world that should be able to do everything.
right.
And then Sean Ryan's podcast as well just talked about it last week. Sean Ryan was a Navy SEAL, and he talked about it. I'm just repeating what he said, but same thing. He said he was heavily addicted to Coke after his service. He did some other stuff, moved to Colombia, addicted to Coke, went to the same facility that Governor Rick Perry was talking about in Mexico, took a drug called Ibogaine, never touched it again, and became clean, like this one and done treatment. So there's solutions out there, but again, that's why I want to have these discussions. And what we're not going to do, it's not going to be this like hippy dippy bullshit where a lot of people think, you're going to come in and like talk about your feelings and tie-dyed shirts. It's like actual research by doctors,
Right.
medical professionals that are doing these studies. And then the people that have experienced these life-changing things. I know personally, a bunch of my buddies have been through this, like these treatments, same thing, going to Mexico to get treated. And every one of them to the T has come back and said it's been life-changing. So, there's something there. And again, I think I've had the experiences in the Veterans Administration here in Austin where you can get pills so easy, it should be criminal. Like their whole solution, you do a 2-minute teleconference. They're like, hey, try this drug for the next 6 months. You're like, that's the answer. I'm going to just get another pill. And again, plenty of issues. I want to talk about this, bring it up because it is, again, we're now on the back end of 2 decades of war for most people. And just like when Vietnam ended, you had all these vets with like, they were just kind of discarded. And now like, yes, healthcare is better. Access to, help and therapy is better, but we got to like take care of ourselves. Cause again, 20 years of war has an impact on this force. That's why retention is down. That's why, recruiting is very difficult. And oh, by the way, this, great power competition and, the adversaries we see in China and Russia across the globe are very real threats. And how do we get ready, for
Right.
all that?
So
anyway, yeah, Austin4America, 6-7 March. It's going to be fantastic. Super fun.
So what does success look like? How do you measure that you've done what you set out to do this year?
Yeah. One, I want to get, obviously attendance. I think it's already a success so far that we're talking about this and there's immediate interest. And the sponsorships are following as well, where again, I thought that was going to be difficult. People, again, a bunch of, freedom loving Americans are coming in to, sponsor at various levels because they see the output. I want to see too success for companies coming here. That's a big one. Like these startups that are going to be, either in the audience or talking or a little bit of both, like take away, like, how do I get in touch with the defense industry? How do I actually, get in this government contracting system? How do I understand it? Where's the resources there? Because we're going to have companies there that, provide those services, the mentorship, the guidance, the lobbying type folks if you need it, because this is important to do that. So I want to see companies like get funded, explore the dual use. And then what I'd really like to see is companies that aren't dual use, are just commercial, come here and learn something, because there's probably a big stigma about like, it's a weird, if you have a company of just, let's just say like young folks out of college, no military experience, no understanding of the defense world, but you've got a phenomenal product. You just don't know it could be used in a phenomenal way in the military. Like come there and learn something. Like, yes, building for defense doesn't mean building missiles and rockets and weapons. Like it's software. That's what we need. It's healthcare. It's food supply. So learning about that, and then just people having a good time. Like, it's kind of intangible. Like how do you measure success on a conference? It's, I think a lot of people could say like money and donations, and attendance, but the lessons learned, we'll capture it and we'll survey folks and, see what they want and like see what happens in 2026. I'd like to see it be much, much bigger. like saying some of the big names in Austin, like, to step up and take this on, because there's definitely a willing audience for it.
That's great. So then, besides obviously everyone coming and hopefully Austin4America ends up being really big, I always like to end with the same question. Luke, what's next, Austin?
Boy, I think we're going to see just a gravitation of some of the best companies in the world coming to Austin, where we see across all the industries, bio, defense, healthcare, manufacturing. I think maybe if I would boil it down, like what would be next, I think, having Austin as one of the great manufacturing centers in the world, like we're talking, and because we already see some levels of that with, the various companies around here in the space industry and automotive industry, where, robotics, the next American Arsenal. I do know companies coming here for, building, the bullets, the artillery shells. So there is that. And I think, we've got land to expand. Texas is big. The land around Austin is great to build. So I think that would be my answer. But I think overall, just, a hotbed of companies in the commercial aspect too will continue to build as well. So I'm excited about it. I don't think there's any slowing down of Austin for a long, long time.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.